So good evening everyone. So first of all, I want to say thanks to Chairman Internal Standard Board Nandaji for giving the valuable opportunity to the Prayagraj branch to host this particular virtual conference meeting, which is very important. And when I discuss with the members in the Allahabad, because Allahabad is a good city, but yes, practice wise, it's a small city. So we have got a lot of good feedback that yes, this is the good initiative by the IASB who runs on a fortnightly basis this type of VCM. With us, Rajesh Kumar Pandeji, who is the chairman of the Prayagraj branch, is also here. Dheeraj Sarmaji, who is the speaker, and Amit Jaiswalji, who is the speaker for today's session. So I'll request Chairman Prayagraj branch, Mr. Rajesh Kumar Pandeji, for welcome note. Rajesh sir, over to you.
Thank you, Gauravji. Thank you, Internal Audit Standard Board of India, of ICI. Thank you, CA Charanjot Singh Nandaji, for giving us opportunity for hosting this webinar. Internal Audit Standard Board of ICI is a very important board. I think our Institute of Chartered Accountant of India is established only for regulating accounting and auditing profession. Whenever audit is started, this quality can be maintained only by compliance of the auditing standards. This type of seminar, webinar is very important for us for learning. Otherwise, we learn GST, we learn income tax very much. But generally, we not focus on internal standards of auditing. So we request personally to all members, please join this type of webinar on standards of auditing whenever opportunity comes to them. I welcome Sri Charanjit Singh Nandaji. Welcome our speaker today, Amit Jaiswalji. Speaker today, Sri Dheeraj K.S. Sarmaji, and all participants. And I am very pleased that this type of seminar, webinar, I am joining and participants are joining. And we are also pleased very much for being with our chairman, Internal Audit Standard Board of ICI, Charanjit Singh Nandaji. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chairman Prayagraj branch, Rajesh Kumar Pandeji, for such a kind words. So, sir, as you rightly said that the initiative taken by Nanda sir as a chairman, so there's a lot of things to say about Nanda sir, and I can say from my experience, because I got a chance this year to work. So Nanda sir is very a prominent personality. So I want to welcome formally. वैसे तो सर को कोई जरूरत नहीं है इतना इंट्रोड्यूस करने की because people knows him a lot. But yes, as a formal introduction, I can say that Nanda sir, who is the Central Council member for 25th Council, and presently he is a chairman to the Internal Audit Standard Board and Digital Accounting and Assurance Board. And he is also the vice chairman of Banking, Financial Services and Insurance Committee. In 2009, between 2019 to 2022, he was the member of Quality Review Board, which was set up by the Government of India. And also, He was into the council from 2014 to 2016 continuously. He was also the chairman of Women Members Empowerment Committee, which is one of the committee set up by the ICI, and also he was the vice chairman on public finance and government accounting. During the period of time between 2014 to till now, 2004 to till now, he was on various positions, chairman, vice chairman. He also represented ICI and members on the SEBI platform. And lastly, he was also the chairman for the Northern India Regional Council. So I'm heartily welcoming Charanjot Nanda sir for his welcome words. Nanda sir, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Gaurav Mishra ji. The chairman of Prayagraj branch, CA Rajesh Kumar Pandey ji. My two younger brothers, whom have now emerged as one of the very versatile speakers on internal audit, both C. Amit Jaiswal ji and CA Dheeraj K.S. Sharma ji. Arun Agarwal from IASB, Surbhi Tyagi from IASB, Ayaz from technical support, and close to thousands of members who are listening to this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you something very candidly, very simply. Times have changed now. Earlier, I qualified CA in 1991, some 31 years from now. When I qualified at that time, there was so simple way of living, simple audits. Now, traditional practices are shrinking. And one has to have a taste of newer areas. Technology, internal audit, system audit, cyber security, blockchains, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, data analytics. These are the buzzwords which are very common in practice areas for practices which are growing. You may do a lot of work, you may do income tax, you may do GST, and you may prosper. But if you want to prosper in true sense, because we are Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, which was set up an Act of Parliament way back on 1st July 1949, when the most important document to the democracy, the Constitution, was not adopted. You are all aware that the Constitution was promulgated on 26 January 1950. We are doing a yeoman's job in supporting this economy. And when it comes to accountants, chartered accountants, or most commonly known as CPAs, all across the world, the onerous responsibility of using standards becomes even more enormous, even more impending. Your board is very keen. We have a council meeting tomorrow and we're taking 6 new standards to the council for its ratification. We want to make the standards mandatory with the active directions of Ministry of Corporate Affairs, because it will ultimately entail a professional opportunity for all of us. But there is a difference now. Earlier, whatever you learned, you used to use that throughout your life. Today, you have to learn today to earn for tomorrow. We have made CP compulsory. Honing your technical skills are important. And I want to tell you, Mr. Amit Jaiswal is a very busy person. Works for Cipla Mumbai. Does not have any time. In spite of that, he is coming here. Mr. Dheeraj K.S. Sharma was the chairman Gurgaon branch, actively involved in his professional endeavors. See, Gaurav Mishra is with Pricewaterhouse. All those people have joined together to ensure that we impart the best of the knowledge to you, best of the technical skills to you. So I want to tell you that today's topics, which compasses, number 1, SIA 240, conducting overall internal audit planning. 2 standards are allocated to each speaker. The second standard to be discussed today is SIA 390, monitoring and reporting of prior audit issues. The third is SIA 320, internal audit evidence. The fourth is SIA 330, internal audit documentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I want to tell you very candidly today, that you have to create an encompassing scenario where you understand these things and use them for your clients' benefit. Not only clients or stakeholders, but for regulators and government also. I want to very candidly emphasize on the fact that the more technical knowledge we have, the better would be our standard of practices. We'll be able to service more clients in a better way. Not taking much of your time, we have 2 of the very revered speakers of the day, Mr. Amit Jaiswal and Mr. Neeraj K. Sharma, who would take you through the nuances of standards of internal audit, particularly these 4 standards. And I want to just tell you that we are a class apart. Chartered accountants are a class apart. They keep, even doctors do not do CP, but we are doing CP since 1985, I remember. We have a benevolent fund, very unique to the institute. I remember Mr. N.A. Palkiwala once quoting that he was not a chartered accountant, he was an advocate. He said, I envy chartered accountants for 2 reasons. They have a continuing professional education, which no other institute has. And they have a benevolent fund. Even the Indian Army Benevolent Fund wants to help only those people who are member of it. Your institute, whether you are a member of or not, irrespective of the fact, you are equally treated with a member. A great work on the part of the institute. I'm proud to be a chartered accountant. And I'm proud to tell you that we work without any feeling of praise from people. We never demand praises. I'm reminded of a couplet which says, तारीफ की चाहत तो नाकाम लोगों की फितरत है, तारीफ की चाहत तो नाकाम लोगों की फितरत है, काबिल लोगों के तो दुश्मन भी कायल होते हैं. We work day and night to ensure that we purposely promote this country to newer heights, help the industry come at line with the best developed countries of the world. And for this, I'm thankful to both the speakers, the branch chairman, the moderator, who have taken out their precious time to ensure that all other constituent members are equally trained. So I want to thank you all, and I request Gaurav Mishra ji to take the thing forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nanda sir, for such a good insights. As rightly said by Nanda sir, and that as of now, internal audit standards are not mandatory, but the steps what he is going to take that to mandate this particular audit standard. Because as of now, in case of stat audit, we follow a lot of standards, but in case of internal audit, we follow the standards. Sometimes we follow IIA or rather than by the ICI. So I think, sir, this is the good move taken by the IASB ICI. Thank you so much for this. So our today's speaker for the first session is Amit Jaiswal ji. So again, sir, the board. So we are very thankful that board is bringing a lot of experienced people to spread the knowledge around the internal audit. So about the Amit Jaiswal ji. So he's a chartered accountant with having more than 15 years of experience into the IA. He leads the global internal audit functions at CIPLA and is associated with CIPLA since last 9 years. At CIPLA, he's responsible for the global internal audit design of controls, including IFC risk analytics, statutory compliances, drafting of policies, procedures, and DOA matrix as well as RISI matrix. He's having in-depth knowledge of pharmaceutical business, as I already told that around 9 years he has only spent at CIPLA, which is a very largest, I can say that medicine manufacturing company in India. And he also worked with RSM Astute Consulting for around 6 years before associated with CIPLA. So I'll request Amit Jaiswal ji for this to start this VCM. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Gaurav ji. Good evening, everyone. I'm Amit Jaiswal. First of all, I'd like to thank the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, the Internal Audit Standard Board, Mr. Nanda ji for giving me this opportunity, and the other panel members, and all the colleagues, friends who have joined for this session. I think so, Mr. Nanda ji really emphasized in terms of the need of understanding the standards. Okay, I think we as an internal audit professional, we should be very well versed with these standards, and we should use this, or maybe in our professional engagements, we should use these standards. With this, we will be able to enhance the quality of the output, which the industry or the service who gets the service, they need the quality of output. And I think so we have enough potential to meet the requirements of the economy, the country, the organizations who use our services. and I see a lot of potential opportunities. And as Nandaji rightly mentioned, the economy and the internal auditing is evolving. No more are the days where we used to do vouching. So now the technology is the base for doing the internal audits. And likewise, the standard which I will be talking on is using the work of expert to deliver the output. Okay, it is SI 240. The second standard is SI 390, monitoring and reporting on prior audit issues. I'll put up my screen. Is my screen visible, Gauravji?
Very much. That's well, sir. Very much.
Thank you. So the first standard which I'll be talking on will be using the work of an expert. So now, till now, maybe I'm not sure everyone uses the work of expert, but till now, the way internal audit, generally the practice, the companies will be practicing, or the firms will be practicing, will be using a chartered accountants or an internal audit professional or a statutory auditor to perform the internal audit. But I don't think so. That is the only way of doing internal audit. There are lots of experts available in the market, okay, whose services we can use to deliver the output. So an expert is a person or an entity which possesses certain skill sets and a unique knowledge. Okay, they have relevant experience in the respective fields which are really technical in nature. And we as a chartered accountant or an internal audit of any organization can use the services of this expert to deliver the quality output, which will be a value add to the organization for which we are working. And the expert can be in varied domain. I don't think so there is any area where we will not have an expert. Few examples are the IT related stuff, right? IT audits. So there we can use the knowledge of the cyber security. See, cyber is the very big risk for most of the companies. So we can use of the technical knowledge of the cyber, the SAP implementation team, the IT general controls, AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning. These tools are being used to perform internal audits, and there we can use technical experts. The next is the compliance audit. So compliance audit, way back, maybe 15 years back, I being a chartered accountant, or we being a chartered accountant, we were doing the reviews of statutory compliances. Now the rules and regulations are become stricter. This becomes one of the risks for the company. And here the expert will play a right role in terms of evaluating the requirements of the compliance of the company, evaluating the risk and the exposure towards the compliances. And they will use their knowledge and the skill set which they have to give the right direction, the right recommendations for us. Next is the forensic audit. Now, forensic requires a different skill set. Certain level of fraud or maybe unethical practices can be detected as part of the internal audit. But for it to get concluded so that it stands in the court of law, so that it stands the external judicial requirement, as a company, we need to use a forensic audit who is expert in these domain. The another set of skill sets which we can use is for engineering. See, there for a company which is engaged in the engineering services, infrastructure, or for a manufacturing company, there are various sort of engineers, be it civil, electronical, mechanical. We can use their services for the technical areas. For example, if I have to say pharmaceutical company, quality becomes a very technical area. Pharmaceutical industry is highly regulated from a FDA perspective, be it India FDA, US FDA, or global regulators. And the environment is the GMP environment, which one the company has to maintain. Now here, the quality, so we use the skills experts from quality domain, who are B.Pharm, M.Pharm, or a relevant experience who do practice in this area. We use their services to perform audit of a quality, which is a technical area, right? So we as a company, and I know many companies, use the expert service of the technical to get the right set of output, to get the right set of risks which are there in the company, and address them appropriately. Other services, expert services, may be in the domain of taxation, insurance, due diligence, or business IP sort of thing. So there are various, so basis the requirement of the company, the area, there are various experts available in the country whose service a company can use. And while using that service, one has to be cognizant of the fact that we have a standard to comply with. Okay, the standard gives the procedure, the framework with one has to comply with. So the scope of the standard is the standards applies to all internal engagements where the part of the work, internal work, is assigned to an expert, and the work of the expert is relied by an internal audit as well as the management of the company from an assurance perspective. So the services used by of an accounting firm or an auditing firm would not be treated as an expert as part of this standard is concerned. There is a separate standard which deals with objective of internal audit that will categorize over there. The objective of this standard is that the technical assistance can be obtained from an expert who does possess the technical knowledge, expertise, and has an experience. These areas, as I already mentioned, are complex areas, not a domain where we as a chartered accountant will be able to add value. Hence, it's advisable to use the experts. The output of the internal audit work has to be credible as well as reliable. And the work performed by the expert should be in conformance of the various applicable standards issued by the ICAI. While the overall objective will be to place reliance on the technical work completed by the experts, the procedures performed by them, and the final outcome in terms of the recommendations given by them for a company to follow. What are the requirements now for using an expert? So the chief internal auditor of the company should independently evaluate the technical and complexity of the subject or the area which needs to be reviewed. The audit universe of the company will include these areas basis the risk assessment which is performed as part of risk management or various parameters which has been defined by the company to evaluate the risk attached to these areas and the potential exposure to the company. Basis that, the areas will get selected. Basis the area, the expert needs to be identified who will help the company to execute from a technical perspective. The expert should be appointed from an independent. The objectivity should be there. He should be independent, and the report should be issued to the company and the chief internal auditor. The chief internal auditor should also evaluate the qualification as well as the credentials of the expert. And the independent review should be performed by the internal auditor to assess the completion of the work as well as the quality of the output. The ultimate responsibility is to give the conclusion, opinion, as well as recommendation in the area which they perform. Now, while appointing any expert, as I mentioned, independence and objectivity of the expert should be the utmost important. The independence can be impaired of an expert, and that needs to be evaluated before they are appointed and onboarded. Now, what can be the aspects where the independence can be impaired? Now, who has the authority to appoint the expert? Ideally, the appointment should be done by an independent function, which is an internal audit function. If the expert is being appointed by a management to perform an internal audit, there is a possibility of impairment of the independence. The second aspect is external agency will be more independent as compared to an employee of the company. So it is always advisable to use external agency as compared to the in-house employees, because they are engaged in the day-to-day operations of that area. Their independence can be impaired. The next aspect is the relationship. The chief internal auditor has to evaluate if there is any existing relationship by the consultant with the company, whether the consultant, the expert, is providing any services to any function or to any department. That needs to be evaluated. The next is there a personal interest by the expert, be it financial, be it getting credentials, be it personal interest, that needs to be evaluated. So these are very important factors, because we as an internal audit function are independent. Our each and every act has to be above board, and it has to demonstrate the objectivity. And the next aspect is the internal auditor should independently validate the qualification and the credentials of the expert. It is very important that before appointing or hiring any expert, as a chief internal auditor, he or she should assess the credibility. Because in case if we do not do that, the quality of output may get impaired. The expert which we onboard may not be capable to deliver the service or the requirement of the company. So the first aspect one has to ensure, or one has to look into, is the education and professional qualification of the expert, the membership of the professional bodies where they are registered, whether they are eligible to service those practices or deliver those practices or services. Some background check can also be performed to ensure that the company is delivering similar set of services to other company. They have adequate domain knowledge. they have worked for the industry in which the service is required. So that sort of check one can perform. The self-certification, the company or the chief internal auditor can take self-certification from the expert regarding their qualification. It can be part of their profile which they share, the engagement letter which the company enters into, and also the conflict, as I already mentioned, the conflict will be checked. Any pending disciplinary action, if there is any initiated, those one should check before we onboard, because these service providers or these experts, we do not use them on a day-to-day basis. We hire them very occasionally, and hence we as a chief internal auditor may not be aware. So these procedures has to be performed so that the right set of skill set is onboarded. The standard also defines the scope, the approach, and the work of the expert. So the first and foremost thing is the objective. The objective of the area which needs selected and the expert being used has to be very clear. The identification, as I already mentioned, the identification of subject matter has to be done, evaluated. The scoping has to be very clear, because these are technical areas. We have to be very clear in terms of what is the scope of the coverage, what are the inclusions, what are exclusions. It should be very clearly defined and agreed by the expert. The expert will also require certain information, data points that also should be clearly established, discussed, and the same should be provided to the expert. We should define any assumptions if that has been incorporated in the exercise. That has to be clearly defined. The access which we'll provide has to be clearly defined. And finally, the confidentiality. Confidentiality of the work, the output is very important. So there should be a confidentiality agreement signed with the expert, so that the information, the output does not get leaked or shared by any other company. So these are various maybe approach one has to adopt. Now, as an internal auditor, we should evaluate the work of the output of the experts and the quality of the deliverables. For that, the standard provides a guidance that a detailed review has to be performed. The audit findings has to be discussed, reviewed. The extent of depth which the technical team has used, that has to be evaluated. The thoroughness of the procedures which has been performed has to be looked into. If the expert has any limitation in terms of challenges on getting the data access, that needs to be addressed. The significance of the observation. So there may be certain observations which are critical, which are maybe high, which may have a high impact. That needs to be evaluated, discussed at the highest level in the organization. And it should be in alignment with the experts' finding to the rest of the area or the audit area to which we are doing. If in case there is a difference of opinion, see, these findings has to be discussed with the head of the department for which the internal has been performed. And if there is a difference of opinion or if there is inconsistency, this has to be resolved, and the chief internal auditor has to take a lead to resolve the difference of opinion and to arrive at a common consensus. In terms of documentation, so procedures, these are the documentations which are required to be maintained, recorded. So procedures which has been performed, that has to be documented to validate the requirements, the independence and objectivity, the evaluation which has been done, that has to be documented. The qualifications and the credentials of the company has to be clearly mentioned. Most important thing, the scope, the approach, the work plan, the schedule, and the output and the report, final deliverable, as well as the management action plan. Each and every observation, there should be a management action plan along with the responsibility who will implement the actions agreed, as well as the timeline. That has to be clearly documented before the engagement is concluded. I have come, so the first standard I have briefed you in terms of all the requirements which standard requires. In my view, this is a very important area each and every company, each and every firm should follow. The use of expert will definitely add value to the organization, be it from a technical output or from a improvement area perspective. I'll move to the next standard, which is on monitoring, SIA 390, monitoring and reporting of prior audit issues. Now, taking the last point which I mentioned is each and every observation for whatever audit is performed during the year or whatever internal audit is performed in past, each observation should be backed by the management comments, agreeing on the actions which are required to be taken, along with the targeted as well as person responsible. Now, with the identification of the person responsible to take the action as well as timeline, this helps us to monitor the implementation of the actions agreed at the later date. So this becomes a base for a future monitoring and reporting of the prior audit observations. So we'll be talking on this standard. Now the scope clearly says that the standard deals with the responsibility of the internal auditor in monitoring and reporting of prior audit issues. These are termed as action taken reports as well. So as I mentioned, the prior audits which has been done, that has to be tracked from evaluating whether the corrective actions which has been agreed by the auditee has been taken or not, and report back in terms of whatever observation has been implemented and whatever observations are open and pending matters to the chief internal auditor, to the management, as well as the audit committee or the board committee. The standard applies to all prior internal audits which has been performed by the company and wherever the actions have been agreed. The objective of the standard is that monitoring has to be done to ensure the closure of open observations. The independent validation. So the process, how it will work is, once the audit gets over, then at the later stage, basis the timeline provided, the internal team has to follow up with the process owners, the head of the departments, to check the status of implementation and the actions taken. This is the response from the management. The internal audit has to validate. They should not rely on the confirmation given by the management or the process owner that this has been implemented. Rather, they should do the testing to evaluate whether the effectiveness of the implementation is there or not. We have seen cases where if we rely on the process owner saying that the observation has been implemented, trust me, next time when you go and do the audit, you will find gaps. You will see that the implementation was not up to the mark or was not in line with what was expected or agreed to do, and not in line with the preventive control. So always the implementation has to be done to ensure that the preventive controls are put or are in place so that these observations do not occur in future. This is a very important, in my view, this is very important activity an internal audit function should perform. This raises the effectiveness of the internal audit. If the implementation of the recommendation has not been done, the overall effectiveness of audit can be questioned. See, there is no point in doing repeat audits, audit, and not focusing on the implementation. If this gets implemented, if whatever action, the recommendation which has been provided, if the actions what has been agreed, it gets implemented from a preventive perspective, this observation will not get repeated. There may be some other issues which may come up, but at least this goes off from the risk perspective. This risk gets mitigated. Hence, it is very important to track this. If in case there are delays, so there may be delays in terms of implementing certain aspects, these delays needs to be escalated at the right level. If there is substantial delay, especially the observations or the issues which has been highlighted are significant ones, are high risk observations, those needs to be escalated to the audit committee whenever it gets reported on a quarterly basis. And there should be a governance structure also to discuss these matters with the management. It should not be a surprise for management or the board. This has to be done periodically and rather than doing a sporadic test. So the point which I'm trying to make is this is the process which should be embedded in your internal audit activity. And we as a company, we take this in terms of high priority. The overall objective of the standard is to ensure that the auditee mitigates the risk highlighted in the audit observations as per the timelines agreed and the decision which was taken. Okay. What are the requirements now? The requirement is clear in terms of the continuous monitoring to ensure the closure of the audit observations, timely implementation of the action plan, whatever has been agreed, the tracking of them, and then formal reporting to the management and the board. The responsibility, one more important thing is the responsibility to implement the action plan remains with the management. While we being an internal auditor, we can participate depending upon the alignment with the audit committee as well as management. Considering the independence, keeping our independence up to the mark or above board, we can participate or support the management in the implementation wherever the management may require, because certain places we will be able to guide them, help them to implement. That can be done. After receiving the confirmation from the auditee, as I already mentioned, we should do additional procedures we should do testing to ensure that the controls have been implemented and the risk has been addressed adequately. The evidence should be gathered. The documentation should be very robust to demonstrate that on the basis of the response from the management, as well as the substantive testing performed by the internal auditor, this observation is treated as implemented. Because if you treat this as implemented, and if the same observation gets repeated in the subsequent audit, then this process gets questioned. This process of monitoring and tracking of the open observations becomes inadequate. Hence, adequate diligence has to be performed before we treat any observation as implemented. The delays, as I mentioned, if there are any delays, that has to be escalated at the right level. In case, even after escalating it to the management or to the right set of HO, head of the departments, even if that has not been implemented, this has to be escalated to the audit committee members. The emphasis should be that whatever timeline has been agreed has to be complied with, and all the implementation has to be done before the agreed timelines. The action taken report or the summary report should be presented on a quarterly basis to the audit committee to appraise them in terms of the status, which can give the overall summary in terms of the number of observations reported till date, number of observations implemented till now, number of observations which are under implementation along with the aging can be given, and not implemented. So one can follow this format of reporting a summary of the observation which are open. So these are explanatory comments. Largely, we have touched upon. Some additional stuff which I'll like to highlight is that one important aspect is that there will be many number of observations which gets reported depending upon the number of audits which a company does. Now, to do this, to track this manually or in Excel sheet will become another task, and the controls, the updation, all those stuff, the tracking, the monitoring will be another task where you will require a resource. In my view, what I suggest is we should develop a tool. As we already mentioned that the IT tools needs to be used in various internal activities. So here a tool can be developed through which all the observations can be updated in the tool. Basis the due date, the tool will trigger the reminder to the user who have been earmarked. If they do not respond, the escalation mail can go. If they confirm that the audit the area is implemented, one can go and test. So I think so tool has to be implemented. The observations which are critical needs to be implemented in time, because those observations, if it doesn't get implemented, the risk will remain open and it may become big as the time elapses. Medium observations can be tracked and documents can be maintained in terms of implementation status. Low risk can be tracked and maybe can be relied on the management on their confirmation. Escalation procedure I already covered in terms of there should be properly defined escalation metrics along with the management as well as the audit committee, so that the entire company, the process owners, the head of the departments are aware in terms of when the issue will get escalated. What are the timelines, the TET which has been agreed, in which they have to respond. If they don't respond, it will be escalated so that it doesn't come as a surprise for them and not for the HOD as well. And even if this does not get resolved at the management level, management should be aware that this will get escalated to the audit committee. So there should be enough transparency in the process which we follow as part of tracking the observations. In terms of the documentation, as I already mentioned, the documentation has to be up to mark. In case of peer review or some evaluation which has to be done, the documentation should be able to support the decisions which, as an internal auditor, we have taken to consider the observation which are open or which are closed. And a periodic assessment has to be done in terms of the status and as terms of the effectiveness of this process. I have completed the standards, both the standards. We'll be happy to take up any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. So, Amit sir, so basically we took the question at the end of the session, means after the end of Dheeraj Sharma by 8 o'clock we will end the session, and we have received a quite good questions, which so I'll request that if you will be in this particular VCM till 8 o'clock, so that you both can discuss and jointly share their responses of the members. Otherwise, I can share the queries, whatever we have received over mail, and then we can communicate to the members.
Thank you. I have a meeting, so I'll need to.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.
So thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much, Amit Jaswal, sir. You have really explained a quite good way these two standards, which is very important. And the question what we have received from the members on the standard pertaining to using the work of an expert. So I think this is, as you rightly said, that yes, nowadays we people as an internal we use the work of like the cyber security expert or CPEs or actuaries and all those things, which is very important. So thank you so much, sir, for really explaining the standards in a very good way and in a very detailed manner. So our today's second speaker is Mr. CA Dheeraj KS Sharma. He is going to take the session on topic SIA 320 and 330, which is again going to be the very important standards in terms of the internal audit, which is basically talking about the audit evidence and documentation. It means that whatever the work you have done, but if you have not maintained any documentation, you have not any evidence, so you cannot substantiate your observations or your findings. So yes, this session is going to be very interactive. Now, Subha, as a former introduction to Dheeraj Sharma, so he is basically the CEO of Devalia eLearn. He's a very seasoned professional with meritorious academic background and versatile public speaking profile. Besides being fellow member of the ICAI and doctorate in management, he possesses multiple certifications from various prestigious institutions like IIM Bangalore, IIT Bombay, and IIT Kharagpur. He is currently working as Vice President in Sankalp Management Consultancy Private Limited, and also he had served as the chairman of Gurugram branch of the NIRC of ICAI. Being prolific speaker, Dheeraj has conducted around 500 plus knowledge delivering program with ICAI, ICSI, corporates, universities, government departments, and other reputed institutions. Being an active social worker, he is also associated with multiple organizations in service of the society. And the big part is this: apart from author and speaker, he is a poet as well. So what we will expect as a member, that yes, at the end of his session, definitely Dheeraj sir is going to say something, whatever the poem he has written. So thank you so much, Dheeraj sir, for accepting our invitation and sharing our knowledge. Over to you, Dheeraj sir.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Gaurav sir. Thanks for such a nice words. And warm greetings to C. Charanjot Singh Nanda sir, Chairman of Internal Audit Standards Board. And he is not only the chairman in the current year, he is the founding chairman of this board. And as much as I am aware about ICI's functioning, he is the person who has served for the longest period as chairman of IASB, and under his able leadership and guidance, the IASB has done wonderful work despite of COVID as well. In the year 2020, the work done by IASB is really recommendable. And warm greetings to chairman of Prayagraj branch, Rajesh Kumar Pandeji, the Prayagraj branch, the very holy city from India, and the city of Sangam of Ganga Yamuna Saraswati, and moderator and Sikasa chairman of the Prayagraj branch, Gauravji, co-speaker of the day who started the session, Amit Jaiswal ji, the team of IASB, Aarti Bansal ji, Arun Agrawal ji, and all the team members. And very warm greetings to all the learned professional colleagues who joined us today in this session. So whenever we talk about standards on internal audit, one thing which comes in our mind, that is all about standards on auditing. That's a different thing. Many of the chartered accountant in practice, they ask the question very simply, Mr. Dheeraj, whether the standards on auditing are applicable on us or not. Similarly, the professionals who are engaged in internal audit functions, they ask the question, Mr. Dheeraj, whether all these SIAs are applicable on us or not. Sir, answer to the first question, whether SIAs are applicable, yes, in every audit engagement, SIAs are applicable. Another question, whether SIAs are applicable, yes, the effective date will be the date when council will notify each and every internal audit standard, but obviously these will be applicable on every internal audit assignments. So today in this session, in two parts, we are discussing on 4 important SIAs. In the first session, Amit Jaiswal sir has discussed about SIA 240, using the work of an expert. And the second SIA he has covered, SIA 390, monitoring and reporting the prior audit issues. In the second part of the session, as I started, we will discuss 2 SIAs. The first one is SIA 320, internal audit evidence, and second one is SIA 330, that is internal audit documentation. Let me start to share my presentation. Sir, presentation is visible?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thanks for confirming. So, can anybody in the chat box or anybody who wish to reply that which are the corresponding essays to the SIAs covered in today's session? If you can recall 3 important standards on auditing. If I talk about SIA 240, using the work of an expert, we have correlating auditing standards 620. Whenever you read 240, kindly refer 620 as well. Whenever we talk about internal audit standard 320, audit evidence, at the same time, we must read out or we must understand auditing standard 500 and 501. Whenever we talk about internal audit standard 330, internal audit documentation, at the same time, we must remember the provisions and guidelines of auditing standard 230, audit documentation. So these are the correlating auditing standards. So the chartered accountants, whether they are in practice or they are in industry or they are engaged in internal audit function or they are engaged in special audit function as a 2-3 audit types like a forensic audit and system audit. These things have been quoted by Amit Jaiswal sir as well. So whenever you are engaged in auditing function, kindly correlate the essays as well with that particular auditing engagement. Moving ahead, whenever we talk about the purpose of these internal auditing standards, more particularly for SIA 320 internal audit evidence and SIA 330 internal audit documentation. If we talk more particularly about both of these, to understand the purpose, to understand the objective of these standards, first of all, let us understand First of all, whenever we talk about audit documentation, what is the purpose of documentation? In a layman's word, forget about your professional qualifications. Just think as a layman, just think as a learner. Why I should document anything? Obviously, to support whatever I have mentioned, to support whatever I have concluded, to support what I have observed. So to validate all your internal audit findings and to support all your observations and conclusions, your opinion, the audit documentation is required. And the starting, Gaurav sir mentioned that if nothing is documented, that means you have not done anything. The documentation proves, it becomes a witness that whatever you have performed. So this is the first condition for the first requirement or the first purpose of SIA 330. Second thing, the SIA helps in the supervision and the review of the internal audit work. Obviously, if I have documented anything in my audit file, I have mentioned that whatever the procedures I have performed, I have documented whatever evidences I have obtained. I have documented whether the evidences I have obtained are sufficient and appropriate or not. All these things can be justified with my documentation only. So this is the need of SIA 320 and 330 both, that whenever I obtain any evidence and I document it in my audit file, it will surely help me in the supervision of the work. Let's suppose you are an internal auditor of a big company and there is a team of 20-25 people you had deployed on that internal audit assignment. It is not possible for you to recheck every document. Obviously, what you will do? You will just ask your team members, just divide the task within your team members and just ask them on a weekly or a bi-monthly or a monthly basis, whatever you have performed, kindly submit your work done. But you will just review those documents. Based on that documentation, first of all, you will ensure that whether the proper procedure has been followed or not. Second thing, based on the audit evidences obtained by your team member, you can supervise the quality of such evidences. Let me give you an example. In the same audit assignment, there is a policy regarding P2P, purchase to pay. In that policy, the level of metrics has been defined for the approvals. So if anything which is to be purchased, having the value less than 50,000 rupees, the clerk can approve that voucher. The accountant can approve that voucher. Your team member has checked the documents about purchase. While checking the trail of the documents, he has observed that in 3-4 cases, there were the value of purchase is more than 50,000 rupees, but the same was authorized or approved by the clerk only. The approval of manager or GM or any other super person, senior person as per the authority matrix has not been obtained. Obviously, they will observe it. they will mention it in their findings, and they will say the policy has not been followed in this particular case. When you will supervise, based on this evidence and documentation of this evidence, you can say that there are some control lapses in the P2P process. Just change the example. There is a policy that any purchase up to the monetary value of 50 lakh rupees, not 50,000, 50 lakh rupees, 5 million rupees, the clerk can authorize the purchase and approve the purchase. The accountant can approve the purchase. There is no need to obtain the confirmation of the general manager or any senior person. Now your team member has checked. On the sampling basis, he has just obtained 2-3 such samples. When the purchase value was 40 lakh rupees, 48 lakh rupees, or 50 lakh rupees, and the same was authorized or approved by the clerk or an accountant. And he said, yes, this is as per the policy. Am I right? Such purchase is approved as per the authority matrix, as per the policy. But boss, whether such evidence is supporting the proper controls our P2P process. So if such evidences have been obtained, sorry, it was disconnected. I am resharing my presentation.
No issue, sir. No issue.
Just sir, I think it's visible now, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you for confirmation. So we were discussing about the audit evidences obtained by your team member, and while doing the supervision, you found that though the evidence is sufficient, though the evidence has been obtained is sufficient to support the policy, but it is not appropriate to justify that there are some internal controls our purchase process. So in that case, merely basis on your supervision on such evidences, you can redraft your audit plan, or you can highlight some red flags to the management as well. The third purpose is to ensure that the work performed by yourself or your team members is in accordance with the applicable standards issued by ICAI. So be it SIA 320 or be it SIA 330. One specific purpose of SIA 330 for audit evidence is the purpose is to confirm the nature, timing, and sufficiency of the audit procedures undertaken by your team member or yourself, and whether such procedure or such evidences which have been obtained by yourself are sufficient and supporting to the ultimate purpose of your internal audit function. So these are the ultimate purpose of all these SIAs. Now talking about SIA 320, internal audit evidences. So what you will describe to what as evidence? What can be the true definition of the evidence in our internal auditing function? Forget about everything. Just understand a very simple thing, that any information collected by internal auditor and used by the auditor for the purpose of arriving at a conclusion and forming his opinion, that is the internal audit evidence. That means any document, any information, any procedure, any record, any statement, whatsoever the information is collected and used by the internal auditor for the ultimate purpose of forming his opinion and reaching on the conclusion and designing in the form of report, that is known as internal audit evidence. It can be internal, it can be external, like obtaining a record of company, that is internal evidence. Obtaining a confirmation from the third party, it can be external evidence. Obtaining bank confirmation, it can be external evidence. Just getting audit evidence for the purpose of legal cases in the court. So you have obtained the decision provided by the court, that can be the external evidence. And these evidences, such information, it can be collected either from the internal documents or the records of the entity or the processes or the matrices followed by the entity, or the same can be collected or received during the audit performance, during performing your internal audit function. Just keep one thing in your mind. At the time of gathering the appropriate and such reliable audit evidences, your audit evidences should be appropriate and these should be reliable as well. There is a person who has given his statement about the company's senior management, and the person he is the third party contractual worker, just merely working on the gate of the company, putting the information in the register about all the trucks, their loading and unloading and receiving of the material, merely based on the invoice. And the person is giving you the information, giving you the statement about the forthcoming decisions of the management in the next board meeting, or the decisions about the merger and acquisition of the business, or some legal compliances of the business. So whether such sources are reliable or not, you have to re-verify. At the same time, we must understand that such procedure is really very much critical, and it involves your professional judgment. It involves your professional judgment. This particular SIA 320, this provides us the guidance about the process of collection of the information, how we can retain the information, and how subsequently we can review the internal audit evidence in the future as well. So such SIA 320 deals with it. What are the ways to obtain the internal audit evidences? Sir, I have mentioned you in the starting slides that whenever you study, whenever you discuss SIA 320, at the same time kindly refer SA 500 audit evidences. More or less you will find that both are same. So what are the ways to obtain such audit evidences? What are these ways? You can conduct any inquiry in the form of interview or in the form of any checklist. That means it can be oral or written. You can observe during your procedures performed. You can do the inspection of documents or inspection of the process as well. You can obtain some external confirmations. You can make some inquiries. You can perform some analytical calculations, like the company is paying wages. So how you can perform analytical procedure for wages? On a monthly basis, you will list out the monthly expense booked in the books of accounts for wages. At the same time, number of head counts, at the same time, number of units produced in the particular month. So you can do analytical analysis. You can calculate the ratio and you can check the variance as well, that in which particular month the trend of expenses per head or the trend of labor cost, wages cost per unit produced is deviating from the standard trend. So such procedure is called as analytical procedure. You can perform that as well. You can do some recalculations, like for the purpose of depreciation. Though the depreciation has been calculated by the software, SAP or Oracle based ERP, whatsoever it may be, but in your separate spreadsheets, we have recalculated. There are some softwares which provides the inventory valuation as well, but you do recalculation of the inventory valuation also. So recalculating, this can also be done. You can re-perform some process as well, like dummy process for purchase checking, whether there are controls or not. Dummy process, dummy test for store issue, or dummy test for cyber security. You can perform these. These are known as re-performance, with the help of which we can obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidences. We can do some computations as well. Whenever we obtain any audit evidence, we have to keep one thing in our mind, that this evidence has been collected. The information has been gathered from a reliable source. Another thing, that the evidence which I am using is sufficient and appropriate to justify my findings and my observations regarding such particular process or the transaction. At the same time, we must keep one thing in our mind, that sufficiency and appropriateness of any evidence is interrelated. This is interrelated. Sufficiency always refers what is the quality of that evidence. If any evidence is produced before you, what is the quality of that evidence? That is the sufficiency. For the purpose of confirmation of bank FDRs, the management has given you a certificate. The same was signed by managing director of the company, that we have fixed deposits with so and so bank for so and so amount. The maturity of these deposits are so and so dates, and total is 30 crore rupees. Obviously, this is an evidence, this is an information, and the document has been submitted by the top management of the entity, by the managing director. But sir, whether this is sufficient? No, sir. No, sir. For this particular purpose, to ensure the correct balance of fixed deposits, you must obtain any document from the banker itself. Either you can check from the net banking, or you can obtain a certificate from bank, or you can demand for copies of the FDRs, physical copies of the FDRs, or any certificate from the bank. External confirmation, you can demand for that. At the same time, when we talk about appropriateness, it again relates to the relevance of that document and the reliability of that source. Though this entire process is judgmental process, there is no such specific parameter that whether this particular document is sufficient or appropriate, yes or no. There is no such checklist. Every time, whenever you ascertain the sufficiency and appropriateness of any document, any audit evidence, your professional judgment, it plays a vital role. Whenever we talk about reliability of such audit evidence, you have obtained audit evidence through all these different procedures performed. The reliability always depends on its source. From where you have obtained this document, not only in internal audit, at everywhere when you are documenting any evidence, the source is really very much important. In principle, if we compare internal and external sources, somewhere internal documents, internal sources are more reliable, and somewhere the external sources are more reliable. So the source, the reliability, that is also important. One more thing which is important about audit evidence is that is consistency. That means whether the process which has been produced before you as an evidence and you are accepting that information as an audit evidence, whether there is consistency in following of that particular process, whether there is consistency in generation of such documents. Consistency is again an important thing for that. If we talk about duties of an internal auditor in relation to the internal audit evidences which he has collected and he is using the information as an evidence, first of all, he has to evaluate the competence, capability, objectivity of the third person if such information has been obtained from the third person. Though it has been covered by Jaishwal sir in as we are obtaining any information or we are using any information obtained from other expert, we have relevant SA 620 as well. At the same time, we must ensure that the source is reliable, the source is competent, the document is appropriate, whether I can rely on that document, whether this document is really reflecting the true picture of that particular evidence. So all these things are to be assessed, to be evaluated. What are the characteristics of internal audit evidences? So more or less, in most of the cases, the external evidences are considered more reliable than internal evidences. Though I have given you an example where the internal evidence was more reliable, like the minutes of board of directors meeting is more reliable than any newspaper cutting. But instead of obtaining a certificate of FD from managing director, the certificate from bank manager is more relevant in this case. External evidence has more relevance in this case, more reliable in this case. Reliability of any evidence always comes from controls over it. If I have given you an example, there is a company in which there is a policy that the purchase transaction of up to 50,000 rupees can be authorized by a clerk, and at the same time, if there is a policy that purchase transaction up to 50 lakh rupees can be authorized or approved by the clerk. So when controls are more effective in the first case, not in the second case, where a clerk can approve the transaction up to 50 lakh rupees. So as much as controls are effective, the reliability of that evidence becomes effective. If any evidence is obtained directly, like being an internal auditor, we write some letters to third parties to obtain their confirmation, and we request them, kindly submit your confirmation at the following address, and the address of internal auditor is mentioned over there. So obtaining any evidence directly is much more relevant, much more reliable, because the possibility of tampering is very low. Whenever any audit evidence obtained by ourselves is in a documentary form, it is more reliable. What is the difference between evidence in the documentary form or evidence in not in documentary form? Sir, I have conducted an interview of CFO, and whatever I have asked some questions and he has replied, whatever he has replied, I have made some bullet points in my diary, and then I have compiled all those, and based on that, I have reached on conclusion and submitted my internal audit report. There is the possibility that there may be a situation when CFO can deny on some facts whether he has accepted during that interview those facts. But if all these questions have been asked in written and the reply given by CFO is also in written and the same is documented, or the interview, though the interview was in oral, but it was recorded in audio-visual mode. So that means it is available in the documentary form. So it is more reliable as compared to any orally obtained internal audit evidence. When your evidences as provided in the original document are obviously more reliable. This slide is really very much important, and to summarize, to understand SIA 320. Sir, being an internal auditor, always understand that you must obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidences. Your evidences must be able to help you, to provide you sufficient reasons to believe that on the basis of those, you can list out your audit findings, you can justify your audit findings, you can come out at the conclusion, and you can report your opinion. Such kind of sufficiency and such kind of appropriateness should be there in such audit evidences. The source of evidence plays really very much important role. It should be reliable, it should be consistent. There is a difference in the signatures on different vouchers. And it was mentioned that all these vouchers have been signed by Director of Finance. But the difference in the signature. So you may ask the question, whether any person who was authorized on behalf of Director of Finance to sign these documents, or these are the signature made by subordinate without taking Director of Finance in his confidence, or without obtaining any specific approval in certain cases. You must ensure that all the internal audit evidences which has been obtained by you, they should record in the written. All your work papers should be there in the written, and all the processes should be documented in the written manner instead of oral. And such evidences should be, such a documentation, such written papers must be able to justify the evidences, the information gathered by you, and based on that, any remarks made by you, evidences used for the further purpose, how they are documented, how they are stored. In the process of collection of the evidences and in the process of recording of the internal audit evidences, always try to follow a standard procedure, so that any of your team member, they can easily determine that following this procedure, we have to obtain these documents, these evidences. That means there should be a standard procedure must be laid down in your internal form as well. And such documents which has been collected or which has been recorded as an internal audit evidence, the details of such evidences, the information of such evidences which you have obtained in original, that should be mentioned somewhere else, and in photocopy that should also be pre-numbered and that should also be defined. Now one question can be in your mind, though this is related to SIA 330 audit documentation. Sir, whether these evidences are to be obtained in the printed form or these can be stored in the electronic form. Sir, both the ways are correct. You can obtain the photocopy or you can obtain the scanned copy. These can be stored in the printed form or these can be stored in the electronic mode. Whenever you are documenting such internal audit evidences, always try to follow your internal audit manual of your company as well. There may be some restrictions on documenting some confidential information. That such information is available to the engagement partner, but there are certain regions. Based on that, the client has mentioned that such information cannot be shared with the junior team members or subordinates of the internal auditor. So you have to keep these things also in your mind. This was all about SA 320. You may put your questions in the chat box, or at the end of the session we will discuss the questions. Now moving ahead about SIA 330, internal audit documentation. Sir, this is more or less correlated to SA 230 audit documentation, and we are talking about SIA 330 internal audit documentation. Whenever we talk about internal audit documentation, what is internal audit documentation? What is document? How to document these things which we have obtained and we have discussed in SIA 320? What is the procedure which can be mentioned as internal audit documentation? For the time being, don't think that you are a chartered accountant. Just think you are mainly an accountant, or you are a layman, you are a general person. So what is the definition of documentation? That means recording of transactions. What transactions? That whatever I have done, whatever I have obtained, and whatever I have concluded. That is the documentation. Yes, sir. When we talk about internal audit documentation, that means recording of the internal audit procedures performed by an auditor and recording of the relevant audit evidences obtained according to SIA 320 and recording the reasons supporting the conclusion reached by the internal auditor. That is called as internal audit documentation. That means internal audit documentation is nothing but a written record. It can be electronic, it can be in printed form. More or less, it is a written document of all the internal audit procedures performed by the relevant auditors, all the relevant internal audit evidences obtained by you during your procedure, and all the findings, conclusion, and opinion you have found being an internal auditor. That is known as audit documentation. And whenever I talk about, there is a term of work papers. This is used frequently, work papers. Sir, work paper or working paper means your documentation, supporting your document. Whether these work papers are complete or they are in such a manner which can justify the entire procedure, then we can say this is the proper audit documentation. If your work papers are incomplete, we will say your internal audit documentation is incomplete. More or less, all your work papers are your internal audit documents. Being an internal auditor, we are always expected to record all the evidences. We are always expected to take care of the completeness and sufficiency of our entire documentation which we have prepared in our audit file. And this particular SIA 330, it explains clearly there are certain requirements in the process of collection of the information, preparation of the documents, retention of the information and your evidences, how you can subsequently review such documentation, how we can use such documentation, how you can store such documentation. All the things have been discussed in SIA 330. What are the requirements of SIA 330? What are the requirements? So whenever we talk about recording of transactions, yes, we have discussed the term recording of transactions, recording of procedure, recording of evidences, recording of conclusion. That means the term recording is an important term. So when we talk about, just keep one thing in your mind, that being an internal auditor, we should record of the nature, the timing, and the extent of completion of all the internal audit activities, all the procedures, all the testings, all the samplings performed by ourselves, and all these records, all these documentation should be in such a form which can be reproducible. Whenever somebody asks you that 3 years ago you have performed the internal audit of this company, and now we found that in that particular year there were certain significant control weaknesses which resulted into the significant fraud and financial loss to the company. Being an internal auditor, what you have performed, so the documentation should be in such a form that it can be reproduced by yourself. That means it should be the written document. Whenever we talk about the proper documentation, it refers to the complete and sufficient documentation. It always refers that every evidence, every documentation or every sampling, every identification of my observation, my finding, it should be documented in complete and sufficient manner. It says, whenever I found any observation, the basis of formulation of such observation, it should be documented. Whenever I draft my internal audit report, so basis of my conclusion, basis of my opinion, basis of my report, it should be documented. And it should be in the written process. The such written process, such written documentation, it should be in such a manner that all the documentation in the way in which these are prepared, reviewed, stored, in fact discarded, It can be checked at any point of time. The quality and conformance of such documents can be checked in accordance with the standards on internal audit. The work papers you prepare, all the internal audit work papers files, it must be completed before the issuance of your final internal audit report. Final internal audit report, boss, we are not talking about just putting the papers in my file, even though I have issued my report few months ago. No, sir, your documentation, your audit file is to be prepared. In certain cases, some administrative issues, some other documentations, if these are lacked at the time of issuing your internal audit report, such things can be obtained and must be documented within 60 days from the date of completion of the audit, similar to the audit documentation SA 230. Who will have the ownership and custody on such internal audit documentation? Ultimately, the internal auditor has all the powers, all the access, he has the custody and he has the ownership of all such work papers. In some cases, when internal auditor refers some information provided by another expert as per SIA 240, in some cases, the information owned by third party that is referred by the internal auditor. So in that case, however, the ownership belongs to the third party, but to some extent, to the maximum possible extent, if the ownership, if the custody can be transferred to the internal auditor, he will surely obtain the custody. Very important and two basic things, all about what should be the form, what should be the content, and what should be the extent of internal audit documentation, and what are the factors which are affecting the form and content and extent. Because we have studied substance over form. Though the form plays an important role, but substance or form's philosophy, that's such a convention that says the substance is much more important than the form. So when the first important thing, that is all about the nature of your documentation. All the written records, electronic or in the printed form, all the written records of various activities and the procedures performed by the internal auditor, that includes your evidences, that includes your information collection, that includes any notes prepared by yourself, that includes the minutes of meetings held with the relevant persons, that includes the external confirmation obtained, that includes the memorandums, that includes the representations received from third parties, that includes the checklist, that includes significant and very specific emails communicated, that includes letters issued and received from relevant stakeholders, that may include some agreements, that may include minutes of board meeting. All these things which can be part of your audit documentation, and all these things which you have documented in electronic or in printed form, these must be reproducible in the print. These must be complete. These must be error-free, and this must ensure the sufficiency of the documentation. Though we have discussed that whenever we talk about sufficiency and appropriateness of any audit evidence or any audit documentation, the professional judgment is an important thing. But obviously, there must be some certain reasons to believe that you have applied your professional judgment. You cannot say, as per me, this document was sufficient, so that's why I didn't ask counter question to the client. There must be certain reasons to believe that there were reasons before you to consider that particular documentation reasonable and sufficient. There should be certain reasons there. The documentation must include the nature of your procedures performed, your ultimate task, the nature of your internal audit. That whether this is process specific, whether this is control specific, whether this is in the kind of proprietary audit, or this is concurrent or perpetual audit, or this involves some part of forensic or the management audit as well. So the nature of audit should be there. The timing, the period covered under your internal audit process, plus the documentation which you have obtained, which belongs to which particular period and obtained in which particular time, and the extension of your audit, whether this is based on the sampling or what is the extension, how to much extent you have performed all your procedures, that should be documented. What are the results of your procedures performed? What are the final outcomes? What are your findings, your observations? Those should be highlighted, those should be documented. At the same time, while performing your internal audit procedures, there are certain significant matters, significant discussions, significant outcomes which are arising during the period of internal audit procedure. Those are to be documented. There may be certain factors which can affect your documentation. First of all, the size and complexity of the entity. Obviously, you can perform only on sampling basis where the number of transactions are very much high. You can do inquiry of certain employees only when number of employees are very much high. You can obtain external confirmation from a limited number of third parties whenever the vendors and the customers, they are in the high number. There may be certain risk of material misstatement also there. There may be certain factors which may affect your documentation, which are the technology-driven factors. Some report has been generated in XBRL or in any other technical language, but there is no person in your team who can redraft, redesign, or understand it in the general language. There may be certain factors related to audit methodology as well, your tools as well, which can affect the ultimate outcome of your audit documentation. At the time of your auditing, at the time of your documentation of audit procedure, you do certain important discussions with the management, with third parties, with external person, with the junior team members. So all the discussions, all the communications which are important, those should also be documented. All the communications in which some significant matters were discussed with the management or the people who are charged with the governance, TCWG, those should be documented properly. Like you have sent them red flag about any particular process, or you demanded to produce some information, but they were not able to produce such information before you, or you sought for some additional audit evidences, or you sought for some additional meetings or inquiries. So all the significant matters discussed with the person who are charged with the governance or the top management, those should be documented. When and whom you have discussed with CFO today, with purchase head today, this one, all these things and their outcomes should be documented. You should document how you have addressed the inconsistency. We have discussed about audit evidences and documentation, that there should be consistency. If there is an inconsistency, so how you have addressed such inconsistency? If there is any non-competence, if there is any non-reliability of the source, so how you have addressed the situation, it should also be documented. Whether you have performed some additional procedures or you have relied on such documentations, so those things should be documented. Any additional procedures performed by an internal auditor or any evidence obtained, information gathered, all these things during any meeting or discussion, those should be documented. And if you find that there are certain departures, some certain deviations from the relevant requirement of the law, it can be the requirement of SIA, it can be the requirement of any other relevant law as well. If you find certain departures from the management side, so those or in your report as well, if you are deviating to some extent from the SIA's compliance, so what are the reasons based on which you are deviating there are some departures in your internal audit function, the reason should be mentioned, and alternatively what you have performed, what kind of procedures you have preferred as an alternative procedure, those should also be highlighted, those should also be mentioned. There are certain auditing standards as well under which audit documentation is required. Before discussing those auditing standards, one thing I would like to discuss about documentation process. What should be the ideal and suitable audit documentation process? Sir, all your internal audit documentation process, it shall be in a manner in which it can be arranged logically. There must be certain logics behind your internal audit documentation. It should be arranged in your file. All your work papers should be arranged in a particular manner, in such a manner which can be reproduced, which justify that there are certain reasonable reasons to believe on those documentations. Your audit documentation, the process, this documentation process, it support your performance of audit procedures, the tools used by yourself, all the written processes in the work papers you have obtained to support them. Also, it should highlight or it should support your quality checks, whether with respect to any particular evidence or document you have checked about the legal framework, whether you have checked about the completeness, whether you have checked about the relevance, accuracy, assurance, whether these are in accordance with the SIAs, whether these are in accordance with the other law and regulations. So all these quality checks should also be done before compiling your audit documentation audit file. If you find that any particular document which is confidential, but this is really very much relevant to obtain and to put in my audit file, so please obtain the proper authorization for that. If some engagements which are outsourced, there are certain things when into audit function and few segments, few assignments of internal audit function, this has been outsourced. So in that case also, you should document, being a chief internal auditor, you should document the procedure followed by them, whether they have complied with the compliance of standards on internal audits and all. So all these things should be documented, mentioned. You have to confirm during your documentation process that you have complied with all the relevant requirements. That there should be some written document, and there should be a policy of written documentation. There should be a policy of, there should be a defined process in which your team is going to perform the internal audit, and they are ensuring the compliance with the relevant law and regulations and SIAs as well. There should be certain internal audit manual as well, which you need to follow. Your work papers related to your internal audit function, in which manner this has been obtained, in which manner this has been documented, reviewed or approved, or whether these are correlated with other processes as well. That means there are certain cross references. So all these things, these should be documented properly. Now moving ahead about the other standards on auditing, internal auditing. When we talk about auditing standard, this is the list of essays where also we talk about documentation. There is the master auditing standard essay 230. 230 audit documentation is the master essay in terms of audit documentation, guidelines regarding the documentation of an audit. The same resembles in SIA 330 internal audit documentation. We have essay 200 where we document the confidentiality, integrity, availability, and all these things which we are performing in our internal audit function. So these things are performed. Whatever you have performed in compliance of SA 200, you document it. When we talk about SA 220 quality control for audit work, yes, obviously EQCR file you maintain, engagement quality control review file you maintain. So in SA 220 also you need to document. SA 240 regarding the fraud, though for the listed entities, particularly auditor has to report whatever procedure he has performed about identification and addressing the certain possibility of certain frauds, financial frauds in the financial statements as well. As a 250 regarding other law and regulations, you have to document it, compliance of Factory Act, compliance of so and so act, TFESI and all. As a 260 communication, those charged with the governance. In SA 330, we have discussed, whenever you discuss with management, the outcome, the communication, the correspondence, these should be documented. As a 299, whenever there are two joint auditors, in recent slides, we have discussed that you are the chief auditor and some part has been outsourced to other party or other auditor. So all these things are also to be documented. Your audit planning, obviously, 315, the ROMM, risk of material misstatement, it should also be documented, and how you have addressed it, how you have reached it, the materiality, how you have done the sampling, all these things also to be documented. And after listing out all these risks, how you have responded those risks, whether you have increased your control procedure, checking procedures, whether you have focused more on the controls, whether you have informed or communicated to the top management. So how we have responded such a risk or assured risk, assessed risk. So that should also be documented. External confirmation, obviously, that is part of your audit documentation, your estimations, transactions with related parties and their agreements and all the written representation, management representation letters, MRLs, which we obtain, that are covered under SA 580. Then using work of another auditor, SA 600, SA 610, using the work of an internal auditor. So this is the list of essays where the documentation plays an important role. So this is the time when we can conclude so that we can take questions and we can conclude on time. I hand over the virtual dais to the moderator, Gauravji. Sir, you can proceed further and we can take the questions. Gauravji, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Dheeraj Sharma, sir. So I can say this, that the standard which you have covered about the evidence and documentation, and somehow you have explained in detail by taking some of the examples, like how you will not believe without having reason to believe on some of the documents. Like if CFO has signed some document, and if you have found some variation in the documents over a period of time, you can definitely ask the questions whether there is any power of attorney or is there any authority letter that yes, CFO has assigned someone to sign on his behalf. So sir, documentation and audit evidence, yes, it is very important, because when you are going to present your findings or your observations, so be it a stat audit or internal audit. So normally in the audit committees, because as a working professional core into the IA, I can understand how the IA documentation and evidence is really very, very important. And again, sir, we are very thankful to you that you have accepted our session, and definitely you have explained a lot. Sir, there are some questions which I would like to take up here. If you are comfortable, can we take
yes,
these
sir,
questions?
please. Yes, sir, please.
Sir, Mr. Atin has asked, what should be the sampling size in the key areas of internal audit? If you can focus a little bit on this area, although this is not related to this standard.
Whenever we discuss about sampling, kindly my request to Atinji, sir, please refer SA 530 as well. Audit sampling, standards on auditing 530. When correlating to SA 530, now let us discuss about internal auditing function. Sir, sampling of audit sampling for a particular area in an internal audit function or in an external audit function, it depends on the complexity, it depends on the risk, It depends on your response to other risk. So first of all, we need to identify ROM, risk of material misstatement. If in a particular area, if being an internal auditor, I find that there are certain risks of material misstatement. So obviously my sample size will be higher. How much sample should be calculated? There is a formula, though it will take 15 to 20 minutes in auditing standards sessions. We discuss that about that formula, but more or less you can calculate materiality, just divide the total of that particular area. Like you are going to calculate the sample size for legal and professional expenses. So the total of legal professional expenses to be divided by the materiality defined by yourself in SA 320, you will find 5, 10, 20, whatsoever the numbers. It can be the ideal sample size for yourself. But if the risk is higher, you can increase the number of samples. If you find that there is no risk, like the company is making its sale to 2 to 3 customers only. There are only 2 to 3 customers. All these customers are PSUs, and there are no certain reasons to believe that there may be any kind of manipulation in the transactions of the sales. So in that case, your sample size can be decreased. It is purely based on ROMM, and you can refer SA 530 as well.
Sir, next question is, it is all about this one, that whether we should escalate the implementation status to the top management if the client has assured you to that they are implementing but they had not shared any working paper.
Yeah, yes, obviously, whenever we find any kind of such thing where any oral statement has been given to you, but our audit documentation says it should be in the written. So either the top management will give you a confirmation in the written format that regarding the implementation of such and such compliances, we are in the process, and by this timeline we will follow it, and this is our plan of action. If any accountant is confirming you in the orally, you should not rely in any case. Obviously, you should document it. You should, first of all, you should communicate to the top management and obtain their confirmation, and you should document it in your audit documentation as well.
Sir, next question is, should the branch auditor share the working papers?
With whom? Obviously, the internal audit function, all the work papers, either it's internal audit or external audit, the work papers are they are in the ownership of the auditor itself, and the auditor is the custodian of them. Now, who is asking? If government authority is asking, you have to submit. If you are branch auditor and the chief auditor is asking, obviously you have to submit them. If they are asking for the summary, you need to submit the summary. If they are asking for the work papers, now there are 2 types of work papers. First thing, the work papers which are supporting your conclusion, those should be submitted whenever asked by the chief auditor. But the work papers which can be shared at the document trail or which are part of your internal procedure to reach on the certain conclusion, that is completely on your choice whether you should submit or not. Like a chief auditor is asking you about the reasons to believe that whether the sampling is sufficient or not, which you have done. So he has shown that, sir, we have not done random sampling. Before reaching at the sampling, we have performed this procedure. Such work paper can be submitted. But behind that, you have obtained the ledgers, you have divided the total of that by the materiality and how you reach at the materiality. So there may be 10, 20 other documents as well, other work papers as well. That is purely your choice.
Okay, and sir, just adding to one thing, so because about sharing of the working paper, so now CARO 2020 is also mandated to the stat auditor to mention that whether the internal control functions are properly working within the department or not. And so one last question is this: if all salary proceedings of any company is done by the external agency, then how we can realize on his work?
Obviously, first of all, we will overlook about the agreement. Second thing, the information submitted to the third party. Obviously, third party is processing the salary, but who is giving them information? Let us take an example in the auditing. While reporting about the accounting standard 15, employee benefit expenses, what we do, we rely on the actuarial certificates provided by the actuary, but we just check the information provided by the HR function to the actuary. Similarly, the HR department is obviously submitting the information about the attendance, about the increment, about the reimbursement of expenses, all these things to the third party. So first of all, on sampling basis, you need to check the information passed on to the third party. Second thing, you can perform the recalculation. There is the, we have discussed about it in the internal audit evidence part as well. Recalculation on the sample basis for 3, 4, 5, 10 employees, just recalculate independently the complete salary, prepare the salary slip and compare it with the outcome of the third party. If there is no deviation in any of the sample, you can obviously rely on it. But if you find any kind of deviation, additional procedures are to be performed.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir. So you have rightly addressed all the answers of the participants. So now, in front of us, Gyan sir, who is the vice chairman of this committee. Gyan Mishra sir, he has also joined. So there is a lot to say about Gyan Chand Mishra sir, because so we haven't met, but yes, we had a lot of words with Gyan sir, and I can say that he has a very special feelings and association with the Prayagraj branch. So in terms of the formal introduction, so Gyan sir is a vice chairman of the Internal Audit Standard Board and CPE committee. And apart from this, he's also the member in around 23 to 24 committees constituted by the ICI. So I'll request Gyan sir to say few words as a vote of thanks of this particular VCM. Over to you.
Sir, before that, one thing I would like to mention about Gyan sir, he is very much easy to reach. And a person whose name is Gyan, so he is really a treasure of knowledge.
Gyan ka Bandar.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yes.
So thank you, Gaurav Bhai, and of course, very distinguished speaker, Dheeraj Bhai, very respected chairman of the branch, Rajesh Kumar Pandey ji, in absentia, chairman of Internal Audit Standard Board, Sri Charanjit Singh Nanda ji, of course, the entire team and respected participants of this wonderful webinar. Good afternoon to all of you. Friends, though I am traveling, but today when I came to know the program is organized by the board and hosted by Prayagraj branch, so it became an onus on me to interact with all of you and at least share few of my thoughts with you. Rightly said by, I was just listening Dheeraj ji. The time ahead is really challenging for the professionals, and we have to adhere certain standards which really need as of now and which are very essential, because if we don't observe the standards on internal audit and the audit is completed, then nowadays it becomes very risky for the chartered accountants who are doing audit to have the completion of the documentation with regard to the especially forensic purpose, what I will say. Because in the forensic audit, when the things happen, then you have to ensure that whatever audit you have conducted, those are well documented. And one more thing, from the perspective of the members who are in practice, that audit documentation is also necessary for the purpose of peer review of the procedure of ICI. The peer reviewer now, which is going to be compulsory for all the firms across the country in coming time. So my request would be that this is one of the basic thing that we must observe. And this is basically risk assessment purpose, how we are going to monitor the risk with both perspective to the business organization, that might be internal control system, and with our perspective, that is with regard to the documentation of the audit. Friends, since I'm traveling, I will not take much time. It's indeed a pleasure to share virtual dais with such dignitaries of Dheeraj Bhai and Jaiswal ji. And this is my home branch, I will say. So we always feel blessed to have the reception of such good thought provokers and good speakers at our end. I'm thankful to the branch and each and everyone. And one thing that is very important as of now, the last thing I will share, that we have to come out of box. The practice sessions which used to be 10 years back, 20 years back, those are not going to be right direction in coming time. So humble request would be that being a professional, lot of responsibility is vested on our shoulders, and the responsibility is to be discharged with due diligence and not in interest of the profession only, but in interest of the nation also. So thank you, the secretary and all the office staff of the board, and thank you the branch chairman Rajesh ji and his entire team, and thank you Dheeraj bhai and Amit ji for your kind deliberation. Thank you, one and all.